Welcome back to Season 4 of the podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Blackwood. As many of you know, I wrote my autobiography as a survivor of human trafficking called Custom Justice. And if you didn't know, you do now. Keeping in line with that, this podcast has been dedicated to interviewing people who also wrote about their own experiences as trauma survivors and how they overcame their pasts. As much as we all hate commercials, they are a necessary evil these days. This is what keeps this show on the air. You can also show support by purchasing one of my many books or donating through PayPal or leaving a review on whatever platform you listen to this podcast on. That goes a long way to help. You can find the links for the books or donation options in the podcast description. And as always, a portion of the proceeds do go to local organizations that help fight human trafficking. Hey, folks, welcome back to the podcast. As always, I'm your host, Amanda Blackwood. I have a absolutely remarkable, amazing young lady with me today. Her name is Tamara, or is it Tamara or Tamara? Because I've heard it pronounced both ways.
So have I, and everything in between. It's Tamara. You got it right the first time. Congratulations.
Thank you, and welcome to the show, Tamara Young.
Thank you for having me, Amanda. I'm happy to be here.
My gosh, your story is just so wild. Normally, I only have published authors on, but you are on your way of becoming a published author. So who knows, by the time this podcast is released, you might already be one. So
hey, the stars might align, and timing always works out, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So let's get into kind of the basics of who you were as a kid. Where did you grow up? Where are you originally from?
I grew up in Northwest Arkansas. It's an interesting little bubble because the Walmart headquarters is there. So there's a lot of corporate influence there and a lot of transplants that are recruited there from other parts of the country and the world. There's also the University of Arkansas, and it's also sitting in Arkansas and surrounded by Arkansas. So it's an interesting little corporate, higher education, old school hippie hybrid bubble. But I grew up there, and I grew up with a very humble family who grew up from various remote parts of Arkansas, and we all sort of converged there. So I had what I thought was a normal childhood. I was the granddaughter of a Pentecostal preacher and grew up in the Pentecostal church. And I had, two parents in healthcare and some in education as well. So that's where I grew up.
Well, very cool. So I've got family in Arkansas myself. My son lives in Heber Springs.
Oh, I know where that is. Yes.
Nice little vacation area, right?
Yeah. Some natural hot springs never hurt anybody.
Yeah, exactly. But the catfish is large as a school bus might.
Yes. A lot of fishing destinations in Arkansas.
Yeah. It's a gorgeous place to be. But your life wasn't always that gorgeous.
No, it wasn't. So I had a nice little cocktail of religious shaming, I would say, that influenced a lot of my upbringing. I believed right off the bat that I was inherently bad and there was just something wrong with me, which I think a lot of people can relate to. I also accepted the physical abuse that I endured as just a normal part of God-directed discipline that is supposed to happen. So I would endure day-long, at times, beatings from my mom, who is, I believe, I'm a daughter of a narcissistic mother. And my dad has later in life been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. I have a lot of grace for my parents now because they come from a long lineage of unspeakable trauma themselves. I, of course, never understood any of this as a child. It's not your job as a child to understand that. I just thought, I'm getting beaten because I deserve to be beaten. Sometimes I would wake up to being choked out, or the abuse of choice was with a dowel rod. Perhaps the thing that sticks out most in my mind wasn't the beating themselves. I don't really remember the actual pain. I do remember it hurt, but what I vividly remember more than anything is comforting my mom after the long bouts of abuse. She would end up breaking down, crying, telling me how sorry she was, how much she loved me, how I was God's greatest gift on earth to her. I was God's way of forgiving her for her past. And I would end up reassuring her at the end of those experiences that it's okay, mommy, I love you too. I know you love me. And I really believed every single time that it wouldn't happen again. So I had this really warped view of love that it always came with pain. And that's just the way love operated, that love literally hurts. Um,
Right. And the people
yeah,
who
my
love you
dad,
hurt you. And if they don't hurt you, that means they don't love you.
exactly. And that certainly translated probably more than anything else into my adult life and how I treated myself and the people I surrounded myself and what I expected.
Yeah.
I learned, I was in early preteen days. I learned from my mom actually, because my mom she drove the vibe of the whole household. So on the outside, we had this double life as a family, really, because on the outside, we were this humble, picturesque, Christian, good, giving family. And I just knew intrinsically that that's what I was supposed to portray to the world. I would hear people tell me how sweet and innocent my mom was. I remember that was always baffling to me. So I was like, I'm terrified of my mother. Um, but that's the life we had on the outside. And then inside the home, I always hated being at home. I craved academics and sports, really any activities that would get me out of the house. And so I really clung to any opportunity to be away from home because I was just scared all of the time to be there because it was a very walk on eggshells vibe. Like you never know what you're supposed to be. The rules are constantly changing. I would get punished for being too happy and loud and too much. And then the next day I would get punished for being too withdrawn and not happy enough or not having a good enough attitude. So I got really good. I like to say I perfected the art of wearing a mask and people pleasing and just picking up and feeling out what people needed from me, what people expected from me in any given moment and reflecting that back to them. I was never in touch with my own feelings and emotions because I just couldn't be, right? It wasn't safe. And I learned as a teenager, my mom sat me down and I always viewed my dad up to that point as really as my protector because he stood in the way of some of the abuse in my early years. And he was also this really gregarious, outgoing guy. People liked him, and my mom really controlled him. So when I witnessed arguments between the two of them, it was clear to me as a kid that my dad was in the right, but I always had to take my mom's side, you know what I mean, and support my mom because she was right no matter what. And I always thought that was unfair. And my mom would always say to me, well, you don't know what your dad's done. You don't know what your dad's done. So I knew she had something hanging over his head. And she sat me down one day and explained what that was and that he had for years had a sexual relationship with her baby sister. And I didn't put two and two together at the time. She described it as an affair to me. And what I learned later is that this supposed affair started when my aunt was 7 years old and continued until she was about 13 or 14 years old. But I hated my aunt after that. She and I had been so close, and my mom is sitting here telling me we have this affair, and the reason our extended family is starting to fall apart and we have to switch churches and lives and jobs and everything is because your aunt is making a big fuss of it, blaming your dad, threatening to expose this affair to everybody. And then,
He
I
was
started to pick up.
7.
She was 7. How does one have an affair at 7 years old? Um,
Oh,
yeah, and I didn't know that she was 7 at the time, but I remember thinking, well, obviously, like I know what my mom expects from me right now, and it's to say, oh, it's okay. I support, you and dad. How dare she? I knew all of the right things that my mom expected of me, and I was happy to reflect that back to her. And then over the years, I just remember being very curious about why would she be so angry at my dad if they have this mutual affair? And I started to realize, and pick up bits and pieces of, oh, well, it happened, when she was technically underage. And so then I started to understand, and then later on, even understanding, there are legal implications of that. And that's what she was threatening. Um, and then, of course, over the years, as I started to become an adult, really started to question what I had been told and wonder, when did this start? What exactly happened? What did she mean by affair? And I didn't really dig into it until I went through my own severe, severe battle and nearly lost my life and started uncovering, or really, I guess, exposing my childhood for what it was. and looking for the truth rather than living in the illusion, that I reconnected with my aunt and began asking about her experience. I also heard directly from my dad, who has admitted to all of it. Um, but I learned from my aunt that yes, it started when she was 7. It was anything but an affair. She was abused insidiously by my father for many years.
Since your dad admitted to it, has he had to serve any jail time?
He has not. By the time my aunt, I mean, it's devastated her entire life. It's really upended her life. And by
Yeah.
the time she had experienced even a tiny bit of healing and decided to come forward to authorities, because she didn't back in the day, because when she was 18, 19 years old and this all came out and my dad admitted it, she was told this will destroy Tamra's and also Tamra's brother's life. If you send their dad to jail, they'll lose their father. So she never came forward when she had time within the statute of limitations. So when she did, there was an investigation. I was called and interviewed by a detective, but no charges were brought against my dad due to the statute of limitations expiring in Arkansas.
Wow. How did all of this affect you personally?
Oh man, it affected me in a lot of different ways. The obvious ones were, in early adult life, before I ever became an alcoholic or got into cutting myself, I lived a double life. I didn't know that that's what I was doing. I thought I was just being a normal adult and doing what normal adults do, which were the way it looked for me is I was really successful on the outside. I had always pursued academics. I saw that as my way out. And so I had a successful career, a pretty normal, uninteresting, unremarkable one, but a fairly successful marketing and advertising career. I had friends. I went out and partied on the weekends. I entertained clients. So drinking was kind of woven into my life anyway. And I thought, this is adult life. It's when you're making your own money, you're independent, you have a community of friends, and you're having fun. What I didn't know about being an adult is usually it means you know how to take care of yourself and be responsible. And those were things, the things that people didn't see, which were basics. I'm telling you, like drinking water or nourishing my body or going to my doctor's appointments or getting my oil changed when my check engine light comes on. I didn't do any of those things. I really neglected myself. So I really lived in this duality of the face that I showed everybody else because they needed the happy, outgoing. Everybody always thought I was so, so happy. They couldn't believe it when I tried to take my life because I was always the funny one and the happy one and the entertaining one. And that was safe. That was my comfort zone. And so I would really retreat when I went home, and I craved being alone because then I felt like I could finally shed all of that and be what I really was, which is honestly completely depressed and empty. So I was really empty, really depressed. I didn't connect anything to trauma. I didn't think I had any trauma. The first time I went to rehab after a suicide attempt, I remember the therapist asking me during my intake, "Do you have any trauma?" And I remember asking, "What do you mean?" And she said, and she listed off a few examples. And I said, "No, I don't really have any trauma." Because even though I knew factually some things had happened that probably qualified, in my mind, well, they ended at a certain point. It's not ongoing. Therefore, I don't qualify for having experienced trauma. And I, of course, learned the hard way through really battling addiction and not understanding why, if I was so capable in all of the other achievement oriented areas of my life, why I couldn't stop drinking to save my life. Literally, I was drinking about a gallon of vodka a day and I could not stop. And I went to a series of rehab facilities, but also mental hospitals for self-harm, and could not figure out why, as capable as I was and how much potential I was told all my life that I had, why I couldn't do that. And that's when, thankfully, in one treatment center stint, I was introduced to the concept of childhood trauma and what it really means, and how the way you internalize your childhood plays a big role. And the facade of everything just lifted. And it was really painful because I got raging angry. I cut off my family. I gave them a piece of my mind. How dare they? I was so mad, Amanda, like just so mad. And That was really the flip side of the addiction coin, right? Because that anger and rage was going to kill me too, unless I figured out how to heal. And so then, as I went ditch to ditch from I don't have any trauma to I probably have the worst trauma of any human being who's ever lived, I went ditch to ditch. And then I landed at a place where I was like, wait a second, I'm an adult and this is my life. And regardless of what's happened to me, I have to take responsibility. And I need to surround myself with people who are going to tell me the truth. They're going to empathize with my experience. And they're also going to call me on my own bullshit and where I'm contributing to the problem that is my life situation right now. And that's what I did. And I trusted those people to tell me what to do next, to teach me how to take care of myself. And it was so humbling. It's really humbling, Amanda, when you get back from treatment and you're really proud of yourself and want to tell everybody that you need a trophy for taking your car in to get serviced on time. It says a lot about the level of humility I was experiencing. But I really stepped into this really beautiful life and this really cool outlook on life that I have now that I think that first of all, I'm able to have grace and compassion, even for perpetrators of really insidious, unspeakable acts. And at the same time, I can have boundaries and not let those people be part of my life or dictate who I am anymore. So it's a
Right.
really cool, it's been a really cool experience, actually. I'm really grateful for what I've gone through because I get to work now with other alcoholic women and survivors of intense trauma and just walk alongside them as they're trying to do the same thing, which is how do I be honest with myself without letting the resentment and anger just overwhelm and overtake my life.
And a lot of people don't realize that the stages of trauma are very similar to the stages of grief. And that's because we have to grieve for the person that we were going to be. And there's so much grief associated with trauma. So it's perfectly normal to go from denial straight to anger, the complete flip side of the coin, as you said. So the 5 stages of grief are, of course, and the 5 stages of trauma are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So you were already going through several of these, some of them at the same time, which is also perfectly normal. It sounds like you were going through depression, you were going through the anger, you were going through denial, all of this at the same time because you didn't understand really what trauma was.
Exactly. Yeah. And I probably ping ponged around several of the stages a few times before I
Yeah.
finally found my way through them because the crazy thing about me is I've always had a really high tolerance for physical pain, always, and a very, very low, almost non-existent tolerance for emotional pain. So a lot of those stages, as you beautifully laid out, were disrupted by me drinking my way out of them. That's always what I fell back to is I didn't see it as numbing. I didn't understand. This is the only tool I have in my toolkit. And drinking in that way, if I could say something a little bit controversial, is it probably saved my life for a time because I didn't know any other way out
Right.
of
It
that
was a
pain.
self-medication.
For sure. For sure. It was just, I needed a lot of help and a lot of patience and understanding, but also a lot of people willing to be honest with me to help me through that and teach me how to basically flip my whole idea of my life upside down, shake out all of the attachments I had to who I thought I was going to be, what I thought I needed to be, what I thought I needed to do with my life, shake all of that out, let it fall away, and make my only priority living
Yeah.
and staying alive and figuring out how to be alive in this day and age as an adult and stay sober through it. And so I had to learn to feel. And so that's the reason I say I had to go through those phases probably multiple times because I had to learn how to actually feel them and sit in pain and discomfort without pressing the easy button and drinking a handle of vodka. You know what I mean?
Right, absolutely. And that's one of the things that I've learned through researching a lot of trauma reactions specifically is that the self-harm stuff is a symptom of a bigger problem. But most trauma reactions do have their time and place to be able to help you through these things. Drinking became a major help for me during the middle of the worst of the human trafficking. Once I
Mm,
got out of trafficking, it was no longer helpful, but that didn't mean it stopped.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Girl,
Yeah.
preach.
It is nuts what we do to ourselves.
It is. And I love that you said that because it's really easy, especially as a trauma survivor of any kind, to fall into the trap of black or white thinking and thinking something was all good or it was all bad, and recognize that, yeah, was it harmful that I was addicted to alcohol? Absolutely. Was it harmful or right? Was it right that I was cutting myself and mutilating my body? No. And at the same time, those were the tools that I had, and they served a purpose for me. They didn't come out of nowhere.
Right. And that was a cry for help.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's a huge reason why these trauma reactions exist, is because it's your body's way of telling you, your mind's way of telling you, you need to get some help. You need to seek somebody who knows how to deal with this.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what was the most healing thing that you came across in everything that you had to go through?
Oh, okay. I'm going to say a word that's a dirty word in the trauma world, and it is forgiveness.
Yes.
Forgiveness was the most healing part of my journey, and it puts a huge smile on my face because forgiveness is what allowed me to finally experience joy. Because with forgiveness comes freedom,
Right.
right? And
Absolutely.
forgiveness, sounds like letting other people off the hook. And in
Right.
a way it is. But forgiveness, spoiler alert, isn't great news for the people you're forgiving necessarily, not when you set really healthy boundaries with those people. It's not a free pass, but forgiveness was the way that I really freed myself. And on a practical level, the thing that helped me, and there are a variety of different tools and methods and programs out there, but because of my position as an alcoholic who was coming through rehab, I was introduced to the 12-step program. And that, even though it's so simple and so basic, in fact, that's why I resisted for so long. Because I was like, I'm too, transcendent for this, really simple, elementary set of tools. But paradoxically, it was the basics that I really needed. And going through the 12 steps and practicing, laying out, my inventory and my part in all of it, and also recognizing something very important for me, which is recognizing what I didn't have to take responsibility for, what I had no business carrying anymore, and going through the process of forgiving the people who had wronged me. And I was really holding on to that as a protective armor to keep people away and to not commit and to keep relationships surface level and anything but intimate. All of that armor I was finally freed from it and able to experience relationships, like true relationships where you're being real with people and they're seeing you at your worst and your best and your ups and your downs, and you're letting those people who mean the most to you in. It's the reason I was able to finally experience what it's like to have a family and to be a mother, because I was able to start to practice some level of forgiveness.
And that's so important. It really is the dirtiest of all dirties in this world. And that's one of the things that I love to talk about too, is that it's not the same as stepping on somebody's toes and saying, "Oh, I'm sorry," and then that person turning around and saying, "It's okay." That is a pardon. That is not forgiveness. That is a pardon. You
Nailed
have
it.
been absolved. Yeah.
So
Forgiveness
true.
is so completely different from that.
Mm.
It does not mean that you're telling this person, "Oh, okay, well, you're welcome back in my life. Come try again." It doesn't
Yeah.
mean that at all.
No, it means I'm deciding right now that what you did and you in general have no power over me anymore.
Right. Right. You're not worth being angry at.
No,
Yeah.
I love it.
So tell me a little bit about who inspires you the most and why.
The people who inspire me the most, and this is going to be funny coming from a serial people pleaser, where I always looked to the popular people. I idolized the popular people. At this point in my life and in my healing journey, really, I really look up to people who tell the truth, who really are speaking out. Even if I disagree with them, I really respect people who are saying things that aren't necessarily the most palatable. Of course, not trying to hurt people with their words, but I have been helped the most by people who offended me to begin with, if that makes sense. And thank God nobody validated, it's okay for you to be an alcoholic, or it's okay for you to cut yourself. People came with grace and compassion, but also truth, and spoke truth into my life, even when I didn't believe it, which was, you have a purpose, you have a reason for being here, and you are completely doing a disservice to your body and your purpose and your future by doing these things to yourself. And so I can't think of any one example that is famous necessarily, but I love the people in my life who I can trust to always tell me the truth and love, because I've recognized I have so many blind spots. I lived in denial for so many years that it's hard for that to not play mind fuckery with you and make you go, where are my blind spots now? Like, what am I missing? And so I need people in my life who can speak truth and their observations into my life, because I feel like it course corrects me where I need it. And we all need that.
Absolutely. Now, I understand that you are still in the process of writing your book, but you do have a portion of it that you're willing to share with us.
Yes. And this will be fun. This was the very first pen to paper exercise I ever did. So it's short, but I think the reason I thought of it right before we met and thought, actually, maybe I am willing, even though I haven't gone through an editing process at all. I'd love to read it just because I think it perfectly encapsulates the funny mind tricks that trauma plays on your brain, and where I found myself, which is realizing I had lived a whole life somehow in denial. I'm the oldest grandchild on both sides, and Aunt Boo Boo's three daughters are all just behind me in age. Her oldest is a year younger than me, and each of the three are spaced about 2 years apart. We were very close cousins growing up, and I always looked forward to seeing them and spending time together. We would play outside in Mima and Peepaw's backyard and peel the magnolias before they bloomed. They turned my fingernails green. We'd make up dances and sing songs, and our family would watch in delight and laugh. We'd act out Bible stories for them and turn them into big productions in the living room. We'd play pretend while the adults were doing whatever they were doing, and we'd assign each other different family roles to act out. And the four of us would talk. Boy, did we talk. I remembered feeling like we had solidarity in the fact that both of our parents had tumultuous relationships. I'm not sure to what degree their parents actually fought, but in my mind, it was just as intense, if not more volatile, than my own parents' fights. Yelling, slamming doors, occasionally breaking things, my dad storming out, my mom sitting me down to tell me they've decided to get a divorce, then telling me the next morning they've actually changed their minds again and decided to stay married. Rinse and repeat. No matter how many times that particular narrative played out, my mom's divorce declarations never ceased to shatter me utterly, and her declarations of reconciliation never ceased to provide me with relief and hope again. In my mind, my aunts and uncles' relationship was something similar. Weren't all marriages, and I remembered that my cousins and I would sometimes carefully dip our toes into conversations about how things were going at home. I was always sure to tread lightly and follow their lead, never offering anything first, but very curious to know if their side of the fence was the same as mine. I would wait for any cues or signals that it was safe to share the reality I lived, but it never went far beyond the surface level of, yeah, they yell at each other sometimes, and yeah, we get spanked sometimes. Except for one time. I could never think of when or where this conversation with my cousins took place, but I was sure it did at some point when we were pretty young, because it's a story I often remembered, especially whenever my aunt and uncle were in an argument or my cousins alluded to anything being less than ideal at home. From what I remembered of that conversation, my cousins had described a fight between their parents that escalated to the point that their dad was holding their mom down on the floor with a knife to her throat. I remembered the story they told me very well. I actually brought this up to my cousins when we were young adults. We were at a family gathering, and one of them mentioned that it's nice to see that my parents seem to be happy. Somehow that evolved in me saying something like, yeah, both our parents have come a long way from the terrible fighting and things like what you had to see between your parents. They looked at me like I had started speaking in a foreign language, so I went on to clarify that I was referring to that time their dad held their mom down with a knife to her throat. My cousins shook their heads slowly and gently, awkwardly told me they genuinely had no clue what I was talking about. That had never happened. I was so confused because I could remember it so vividly. I had clear visual images of what they said happened. Their mom was wearing a white nightshirt, no pants. She had wavy brown hair and glasses. I could hear the rage in their dad's voice as he screamed something at their mom I couldn't understand. I could hear their mom desperately begging him not to kill her while she laid on the brownish carpet. I could see the box TV behind them on the living room floor. I could flashed to seeing the knife being gently laid on the kitchen counter when they realized that someone in the room was watching them. I wish it could say it struck me then that this memory wasn't a story they told me, that it was of what I witnessed in that apartment in Fayetteville, but it didn't strike me at all then. I just left the conversation a little confused and decided that they either didn't remember or didn't want to remember. It didn't strike me until several years after that memory that my brain had shifted to a memory of a secondhand story was actually one of my earliest memories. My brain, in a merciful attempt to keep me safe, had mislabeled it as my cousin's experience. The brain is funny like that.
Wow. I recognized it immediately. Wow.
It's wild, isn't it? And it's wild that reading that after I probably wrote that 2 years ago, Amanda, and reading it, I don't know if you heard, but I had to stutter through it.
Yeah.
It just hits you all over again. How could I not know?
And it will always be emotional. And that's the thing with trauma. You don't just get over it. Don't
Mm.
tell somebody to just get over it. This isn't something you just get over. This is a part of who we are because trauma reforms the brain. It is more than just a mental illness, it is a brain injury. You can't cure that. This will be with us for the rest of our lives, and there will be things that will trigger us every now and then, and we have to be prepared for that. But going through the process of trying to heal ourselves is what we need to do to really start facing it and figuring out what our next steps are and how to have a better life on the other side.
And we can't do it alone. We got to stick together. It's why
Yeah.
I'm so happy you do a podcast like this. Just to
Thank
hear
you.
stories.
Thank you. Where can people find you online if they're looking for you and they want to follow you and find out when your book is released?
Thank you for asking. My Instagram account is The Recovering Liberal, and I'm also on Facebook. Just my name, Tamara Young.
Very cool. You know, I'm going to be following you. So looking. I am going to allow you to have the last word here on the podcast by answering my very most favorite question ever. I ask this of all of my guests. What is one thing that you love about yourself, not related to your physical appearance?
I love my courage. I am fearless and it manifests all over the damn place. Nothing scares me anymore. I will try new things. I will take up for myself. I love especially the courage that I have in relationships to go to dark places with people when I need to, and the courage I have to protect my own energy when I need to.
If you've enjoyed tonight's episode, please make sure you check out the episode description. There you'll find links on how you can learn more about this guest, links to connect with them on social media, and how to support the podcast. Remember, I don't get paid to do this. My boss is a bit tight-fisted. I can say that. I work for myself. In short, this show really is all about the guest. If you've enjoyed their interview, please feel free to let them know. You can also tune in to my other podcast, Growth from Darkness, which is co hosted by a lovely lady from Australia. We talk about what trauma responses are and healthy ways to move beyond the past. For more information, just go to growthfromdarkness.com. You can also follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/growth from darkness.